financially this is viable, and the curriculum committee endorses this, and we don't have any unforeseen impact from a facility standpoint that we haven't envisioned, Scott could certainly come to a board meeting and sort of present it in totality, because I would want to be sure that everybody understood every nuance, and if you had questions, that he was here to answer those.
In the last 20 years, has the school system had a system like this in place? I have a vague recollection of my older son.
I can tell you that there was a time that I remember from my own children where there was a period zero. I know in the days of IB, there were scheduling constraints that made that a necessary evil, so to speak. But I do not know that Burns High School has ever had a rotate and drop schedule. But that's just my recollection.
I'll check with this.
This came out of, one day Scott shadowed a student, and with 8 period changes, he was exhausted and shocked at how much rushing there was and how much, wasted time there is in getting back and forth. So it cuts the passing by 2, and there's more time in the classroom. So he I think that's what prompted this.
Yeah, it sounds good. I was just curious if we had not tried it before.
Right.
Why we would stop.
Oh, sure. We are definitely in the minority right now in terms of our neighboring districts, in that we have a more traditional schedule, and I think the consensus is that most have moved toward something like this, with variation.
And I didn't quite hear everything you said, but if I'm repeating what you said, you'll have to forgive me. But the idea about kids passing, back and forth in the halls, like everybody passing at one time, again, you go back to stress, like you pack up your books, you're rushing to your next class. It could be on the other end of the whole building. And it's just like, that's not good. It's better to be calm.
I think every parent who's had a high
Back
school
to
student
school
going
night.
back to school
Yes.
knows exactly what that's like.
Yes,
You
yes.
never actually get there.
And God forbid you have to go to the bathroom.
Oh,
Exactly.
yeah.
And just for the high school.
Okay, so next item. We also have a visit from Olga Edgerton. And Olga gave the committee an overview of what the district wants to achieve in math and how to proceed. She met with the 2nd through 5th grade teachers for discussions. First and foremost, we need to align our math curriculum with the New Jersey Student Learning Standards and JSLS. This means teachers' lessons will be tailored to those standards without extraneous concepts. Students will be tested on grade level standards. Therefore, it is logical that teaching time is devoted to the standards that are developmentally appropriate. Benchmark assessments will indicate areas in which there is proficiency and areas which need ongoing practice with supplemental lessons. Alba will continue to meet with math teachers beginning on the very first day of school. Right? Then she mentioned that the Synop 5 grant has been extended for another year, so we'll have 6 B labs for another year. Then Colleen Butler was at our meeting, and she informed the committee that Chef funded kits for BMS and VHS through the strategic plan behind suicide prevention implementation. We also received a state grant for training our counselors and health teachers, as well as access to resources and 3 assemblies. We are offering a program called SOS Signs of Suicide. The video program is designed for middle school and high school students. The video shows dramatizations and real-life stories of hope about the right and wrong ways to react when a friend exhibits certain behaviors. Included is a mental health self-assessment that screens every student for depression and suicide. Schools will receive training for faculty and staff on warning signs and how to support a student in need. Attention will also be paid to tick-borne diseases. And Michael Catelli came in and provided us with the AP test scores, and we reviewed them, and the committee decided we would like to digest the scores further, so we'll report on them at a later date. All field trips were approved by the administration with the exception of the Disney field trip request. Further exploration of the Disney field trip is needed. That was our reason for not approving it at this particular time. So I'd like to move items 1 through 16 on the agenda and items 5 and 6 on the agenda.
Actually, I have a question about, so I'm looking
If you
at.
just speak into the microphone, please.
Sure.
Second.
Thank you.
So I have a question on the field trips. Looking through the field trips, I noticed that one was submitted well outside policy. And it was clearly something they must have known about way in advance because it's a very expensive field trip. So how do we deal with that? Because while policies are great, if they don't actually meet the needs of the system, we should change the policy or not, should just not enforce policy.
Right, and this did come up last year too, and Colleen or Gretchen, I think I'm going to let you address that.
We certainly share your concern in the sense that we want every field trip to come to us in a timely manner and to be submitted on time for careful consideration. There are always lots of moving pieces. The advice of our attorney last year was if a field trip has moved forward without the appropriate approval of the Board of Education, that it is appropriate for the board to approve it after the fact. But I will tell you that anybody who provides those forms to us at a late date has the wrath of Mrs. Butler to deal with. Because there are a lot of things that have to happen, and you get into nurses that have to go on trips and arranging for substitute nurses. So it is an expectation that people will abide by those dates in the policy, because there aren't too many trips that we plan for the next day.
Okay. So we don't think, the policy is fine the way it is.
The policy is fine the way it
And
is,
you're working- and
and
you're working on
we're
enforcement.
doing our best to enforce
Okay.
it with
We're unleashing
strength.
Mrs. Butler.
Got it.
I don't know if this is for you guys. The approval, the number 14, approval of 504 coordinators. I noticed that we have, Teresa, then we have Jamie Walker, which,
The new director of guidance.
oh, new director of guidance.
She is.
So, okay, so director of guidance, and then the principal for middle school and the principal for Bedwell. We used to have the AVP, assistant principal there.
Those roles have moved around over time, Monica. Sometimes they were the guidance counselors directly. Colleen, do you want to speak a little bit about the thought process around ensuring that these are all administrators?
Right, we really felt that in that role, it's a really important role. And while the counselors play a very important role as part of the 504 team, we really wanted an administrator to be the coordinator in each of the buildings.
Okay, but the director of guidance for the high school, not the, no, I'm used to the high school used to have the assistant VP as the coordinator, and now it's the director of guidance.
Several years ago.
Oh, I was gonna
Yeah,
say,
yeah.
it was
We
last year, it
didn't
was
have a
Colleen.
director of guidance
Gotcha.
when he was doing that role.
Okay.
Dr. Portman filled that role
Yes.
before there was a director of
Yeah,
guidance.
that's what it was.
And then when the director of guidance became a new role, I took that on.
Oh, you did?
So last year,
So
Colleen,
last year,
as
last
the
year.
504.
Oh, last year,
coordinator.
you just took 1 year as the director of guidance?
No, 3 years, but I was all of the years that I was there, I was the 504 coordinator.
Oh, okay. No, I'm just saying. I don't remember that component, just a little bit. Corbett being the person I talked to, okay.
Question about the school improvement panels. What's the Band-Aid for those panels?
I don't know if I completely understand your question, but I'll get.
What do they do?
They are mandated by the state,
Yeah.
so every school has to have a school improvement panel.
Right.
They have guidelines for the membership of each school's team. It cannot be, I believe it's more than 1/3 teacher membership. So it will always have a teacher on it, it will always have administrators on it. It will have parents on it. It has to meet twice a year. It basically reviews data surrounding HIB cases in the sense that those statistics are always public and are included on our webpage. So there is conversation at least twice a year around the climate of the building.
Is there a deliverable?
Is there a deliverable?
Is there a deliverable, is there a work product?
There are deliverables in the sense that, that the committees will digest and look at different things, and they certainly have minutes, and they certainly, have directions that are provided by the state in terms of what their role is. I can't say that there is a tangible, here's what they, kind of did. But they're not things that we can not have. And certainly when CUSAC came in, they want to see evidence that these committees, your school safety and climate team, your
Right.
SCIPs are meeting, what their meeting schedule is and what they are discussing at those meetings.
Seems like a great, mechanism for feedback, particularly given parental involvement. I just hadn't really been familiar with
Gotcha.
any real, that it sort of came across as more like a box checking exercise. And I just don't, I would be very curious as to see what
Right.
can come of that, and.
I think certainly from a standpoint of these particular names and these particular committees, there is some compliance aspect to that, so
Fair
I would
enough.
not argue that. I think that our work around things like climate and culture are certainly bigger than these. I know we've had the middle school come in and talk about the work that they've been doing. We've certainly invested money in those efforts. They are going into year 2, right, Tim? And so I think everybody recognizes that, students' experiences in school are very much colored by the climate and culture of a building.
Yeah, I just want to make one observation on that. You commented about all those work that was done on the analysis of the math curriculum, and I would just say it was really outstanding. It was very impressive, totally professional, and even color coded, which made it easy to remember. It's like red, yellow, green. So just an incredibly welcome addition to this district, and really excited to see where all of that stuff goes. But if you haven't had a chance to look at it, if you can, for those who are on the committee, please, I think we should try to circulate
can
that.
share that.
Yeah, I think it would be
She's coming next month.
to
Well,
share.
to present those will be your standardized test scores.
Yeah.
But certainly we can share out what she produced. She gave us a sample of, I think it was grade 4, right, Olga? In terms of the work that teachers did to really unpack standards and sort of look at what happens on a daily basis in their classroom and where they feel they are really nailing expectations and where they may be falling short and where there are gaps.
Yeah.
So you talk about an artifact, what artifact came of this summer work is really a daily calendar where now we look at our purchased curriculum and we can say, here are lessons that really support what we're driving towards and where there are holes in that and we have to supplement, and where there are things that are extraneous and maybe we shouldn't kind of skip over those lessons. Certainly we have an understanding that at some point there may be changes to the curriculum that are warranted, but for a step 1 at this point in time, it seemed like the best place to kind of dig in.
Yeah, it was very well done. I mean, it highlighted some issues in very clear, transparent ways, but
fantastic.
you can't address them until you analyze and isolate. And it was also done in a collaborative way with the teachers, which I thought was outstanding, so that was just wanted to.
So Tim, thank
Make
you
that
for
observation.
making that statement, because I believe, I usually don't speak for everyone, but I am going to now that we all agree with your statement about all this presentation.
And so we, the non-committee members, can we see that as well?
Yes, we can
Great.
certainly get that
Thank
to you.
Further discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Baker?
Yes.
Ms. Cooper?
Yes.
Mr. Mail?
Yes.
Mr. McDonald?
Yes.
Mrs. Santoro?
Yes.
Mrs. Tover?
Yes?
Ms. Virtue?
Yes?
Ms. Birch?
Yes.
Mrs. Lees?
Yes. Personnel policy.
Well, once again, Bob, you have made my job very easy tonight because you've checked most of the boxes I have to report on, which is good. So policy and personnel met on August 20th. I'll start with personnel. Dr. Dempsey made a small wording change to aid in the hiring of cafeteria aides. And that just changed the requirement from 2 years of college from required to desired. Dr. Dempsey gave us an update on the hiring of one vacant SLEO position. And again, she's talked about this, Bob has talked about this, the district's still fully committed to this position, and we are working with the Bernardsville Police Department, who is actively looking to fill this position. And then, once again, as we always do, Dr. Dempsey reviewed our current staffing requirements and needs within the districts and gave us an update as to where we are. I should move personnel now, right? Before I go on to policy?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I need to move items 1 through 59 on the agenda, and then items 2, 6, 9, 11, 17, 57, 61, and 63 on the agenda. I know, this is a big night.
Well, and that is because as we settled the Shea contract, all of the teachers needed to be reappointed, not just for their new steps for next year, but for their 18-19 restated at the new salaries. So that's why there's so much detail in there.
Yes. Any questions?
I have one thing that on number 24, the overload, is that in addition or is that included in the
I'm sorry, hang on one sec, Monica, I just want to find 24.
Number 24,
What
yeah.
page is it on?
Page 17.
So your question was whether those overloads are included in the other salaries that are reported out, or whether they are in addition to?
Yes.
Overloads are in addition to. The salaries that are reported in the subsequent pages are the salaries as they would be on the salary guide. Overloads are an additional teaching responsibility that contractually comes with a cost. It is certainly something where we use these judiciously, in the sense that there's contract language that says that you can't use overloads to actually minimize the number of full-time equivalent staff that you need, nor would that be in students' best interest. I will tell you that compared to last year, our overloads are less by about $10,000. So we had fewer overloads this year than we did last year dollar-wise.
How much is it?
The total for these, I want to say it was, well, you've got them right here, right? 21, 29, 30. I want to say it was about $100,000. It might have been a little bit more.
And we had budget for more, you're saying, so we went.
If we budgeted based on last year's was around $129,000, $130,000.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Anybody else?
Did we get a second, I'm sorry?
I know. We get a second?
Yeah, on the personnel.
Second.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nicole, take you.
Just while we're on personnel, we stand with the replacement for the theater director.
Director is on your agenda.
Yeah.
The candidate that is being recommended came out of the process last spring. Scott involved students and parents from the PAC organization. They, the outgoing director could not have been kinder about helping us through that process. I called him and he recommended a search, something called, I think it was called Art Search, but certainly a facility that would not just be our regular Track posting. And Scott and the group vetted the applicants and identified, candidates that they wanted to interview. I'm not sure how many people they brought in to meet with. I know ultimately there were 2 strong candidates that the group kind of honed in on, and this is the candidate that we is recommending.
Okay, and the group, the students and parents were engaged and they're enthusiastic.
Absolutely, throughout the process.
Yeah, and
Yes.
they're enthusiastic about the selection.
That is my understanding.
Excellent. Thank you.
Sure.
What number was that?
Oh, I don't.
I'm just wondering, I mean, it's not.
Her name is Susan, I want to say Spidell.
It's number 17 on the agenda.
Right? I know, there is so much, yes. Last page of the addendum, Monica, up at the top.
Oh, okay.
Any more discussion? Roll call. Mr. Baker?
Yes.
Ms. Cooper?
Yes.
Mr. Nail?
Yes.
Mr. McDonald?
Yes.
Mrs. Santoro?
Yes.
Mrs. Tober?
Yes.
Ms. Virtue?
Yes.
Ms. Birch?
Yes.
Mrs. Lees?
Yes.
Okay. So in policy, we started out by reviewing the revised fundraising form, which apparently we're gonna do again.
Yes.
So we will.
But that's a good thing. It's
That's
always
okay.
good to have more than one
Absolutely.
committee consider something.
But one of the things that we had wanted to put forward in that discussion was having those approved by finance, which may be where some of your ideas and thoughts come into. So much like we approved the field trip forms, we thought those should get submitted and reviewed and recommended for approval.
Which happened at this last meeting, so, and that will be ongoing.
Okay, so that was one of the things we wanted to see, and then we will, you can fill me in the committee and on what we're gonna take a look at. Okay. We have already covered the request for more time on the field, and that's been covered in facilities, but per Janice, we will take a look at that policy in committee again. We have in first reading tonight, the, so in committee, we looked at the revised language for the random student drug testing policy. And that is in first reading tonight with some revisions to the appeal process. We also have in first reading tonight, the earned sick leave policy, which again, Bob has already touched on. And we have in second reading tonight, the board member and term receiving the sick policy. So, and then finally, we discussed the Strauss Esme sustainability policy, which we had been talking about taking a look at for several months last year. And we took a look at that. At this time, we don't think that the policy is going to do anything to enhance the current standards and practices we have with regards to sustainability. So we're not recommending that we adopt that policy at this point. So that is it for policy as far as what we discussed, and I'd like to move items 1 and 2 on the agenda. Can I get a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Just describe like the backdrop for making modifications on the drug testing policy on the field.
Yeah, 1 and 2.
I had a feeling you were gonna say that.
Pass that one.
The only change to the policy, Tim, regards the appeal process. There was a sense, last year was the first year that we had this policy in place. And there was a sense that, you may remember that we modified the appeal language once before to shorten that timeline. There was some concern that perhaps it still was not as, our control was not as tight as it might be. And that, my conversations with different board members would indicate that if the district feels committed to having a policy like this, we want to be sure that it is not one that is, we want it to be as airtight, if you will, as it can be. I spoke at length with the woman who's our contact at Prevention Specialists, who's the lab that we use, to pick her brain a little bit about where we thought the appeal language perhaps opened up to some was a little too much wiggle room, and what her recommendations were for how we could address those concerns. That company does drug testing for the Department of Transportation, and so she really, from a standpoint of knowledge, I felt like I was talking to somebody who kind of knew the ins and outs of this. So what she recommended and what we have in there now is that if a student's, you'll recall when a student comes in to be drug tested, there is a dip test at the site. So there's an instantaneous, are you, and I'm going to use the positive or negative because we know that non-positive is just a little labor intensive language wise. So when we have that dip test instantaneously, we have a result. Right now, if the result is negative, fine, you go back to class, it's all over. If the result is positive, the sample that has been tested is then sent out to a lab for another test. So we have this one sample has now been tested twice, once on site and once off site. The law says that if you have a policy like this, you have to have an appeal process. It does not dictate what that appeal process has to look like. What she recommended is rather than have students have any kind of confirming test, which is what we had in place, rather than have a confirming test be handled outside of that setting, so that a student is leaving and going off and having another test done somewhere else at some later time, that a second sample be collected at that point in time during this collection, so that the confirming test could then be handled by prevention specialists. They would handle all chain of custody issues, and they will then send that second sample off to a separate lab. So if a parent chose to appeal the decision, you would now have your initial dip test results, you would have that first sample that's been sent to a lab for testing, and you would now have a second sample that had been collected at the school during that collection window, sent to a second lab to confirm the results of the first test. I know it's a long thing to explain, but the thought was that by having prevention specialists take care of any chain of custody issues, concerns about that confirming test being something that was outside of the school's control were mitigated.
And have we sort of undertaken a review, sort of 12 months in of the program, how it rolled out, and the volume, the number, and whether we want to make any adjustments up or down to
the number of students that, we were at, I believe your policy has a range of percentages, and I know it's 10 to, do you remember what the higher end was? 30 maybe. We came in closer to the 10%. I think every test we do has certainly a financial cost associated with it too. So we have not undergone any formal, consideration of that. If the board would want us to do that, we could. But
you would, the board does not need to act to increase the number of samples that would be taken, right? Because you
No, no, you would not need to act on that. They, this company comes in generally once a month, give or take. Scott, you know, has, he keeps track of how many tests there are, and we want to make sure that we are at least in that minimum range, so we are abiding by the policy. But if it was a decision to say, for instance, 10 is too low, we want to make 15%, then that would definitely be a policy change. Right now, we come in that range.
So that was my question is, I thought the policy gave a range.
It does.
So we would not have to affirmatively make a decision. We're not.
No,
directing-
unless you wanted to change the minimum, that would be,
Oh, change the minimum.
right.
It's my understanding that this was the first year we had this policy. Wasn't it a much better experience at school events?
That is,
Didn't we not have,
I can tell you from, you know, in terms of talking to Scott, when you talk about school events, a lot of the things you're talking about too are the breathalyzer piece. So certainly that is a much more easily assessed reaction, in the sense that when you talk about the prom, when you talk about football games, you know, the consensus was that the atmosphere at these events was very different, that the students all had fun, that it was, you know, there was no question of anything else. I think when you talk about the aspect of the drug testing per se in terms of the school, that's a little bit harder of a what's the impact of that. Certainly, we had enough students come to us last year and talk to us about their perception of that impact.
it might be interesting to have like maybe a review with students, you know, number of incidences, or if we're higher or lower, just in general, because
And
we
maybe
don't
that's
really.
something, I mean, Colleen was at the high school, I don't know, Colleen, if you have anything to add to
And I
that
don't
in
even
terms of
mean
your.
the actual results of the test, but
Right.
things that happened in the past where, you know, somebody came to school obviously under the influence, were those numbers fewer?
Right.
Was it improvement?
Mhm.
I think for sure, I know the breathalyzers, I heard from numerous students that the experiences at school events was just different, because there wasn't that pressure of, were you drinking, could you, you know, that was kind of just removed, so it
Right,
made it
right.
better, but I don't know, what do you think about?
We have had a lot of students too say that it really helped them to be able to say, oh, no, I can't.
Was there an
Which-
impact on the participation in the events, attendance, or
I think so, not to my knowledge, no. And I think kids really just were able to be free to just have fun. I think it's,
And in terms of outside of the testing incidences, do you have any sense of whether they're more or less, or?
it's difficult to say, I mean, I don't want to put a number on something. My general feeling is that this past year was a very positive year. So, I don't have numbers in front of me to that effect, but it's my general
I think
feeling.
I asked this last and I don't remember, the events that are for example, like project graduation host, is that something that we test? We breathalyze for that. So that's because it's considered a school event, because we have approved the fundraiser, or I'm just trying to get, I'm asking these questions, I'm just thinking.
You mean what kind of stamps it as a school
Yes.
event, Monica?
Yes. So for example, this arts one that's coming up, that they're gonna have somewhere, we don't know where.
Right, I understand your question, I guess, and I don't know, quite frankly, if there is anything that defines the term school event in policy. You know, lots of those policies start with definitions. I could go look. To me, if something is staffed by our employees as chaperones or supervisors, I see it.
I thought that's.
We have chaperones who are there overnight
That's also
with
the
our.
entire senior class
But-
versus.
But to her
Yeah.
point, we definitely have teachers who are there overnight with those students, yes.
No, that's I'm talking about, for example, they have the, where they dress up, what's the one?
Like the fashion show and
The
that.
fashion
Yeah.
show, and then they have the one, where they,
Yeah,
everybody.
that would not to me be, we wouldn't be breathalyzing students at the fashion
That's
show,
a
that's
fundraiser,
not.
right?
Yeah,
So that's my
you got a
question.
good question. Yeah,
That's my
no.
question, because they have set a couple of events that,
Right, no,
I don't know, I just was wondering.
right.
I'd like to go back to the language that's being changed.
About to what? I'm sorry.
To the language that's being changed in the policy. So since this was the second time in the short time that I've been on the board that we're changing it, I went and looked at other schools in the area that have random drug testing policies. And most of them had a policy very similar to what we initially started with a better chain of custody language for the sample. Have we reached out to the other schools to find out why they're not having the same struggles and having to change their policy?
I don't know that they aren't. I have certainly not done that, and I could do that. I guess are you saying that the chain of custody language surrounds the appeal?
Yes, so I didn't find any other, and I looked at probably a dozen, that had a second sample. I mean, I didn't do an exhaustive search, it was late at night, last night. Didn't find any that had a second sample, and I didn't find any that had a 4-hour window. So almost everybody had a 24-hour window, and I objected last time to the 4-hour window, because I think it discriminates against working families. Because you get a call in the middle of the day, you may not be able to actually respond.
I remember that conversation.
And then here, we're saying, if you can't produce a second sample, you're guilty. And I think we're making the appeal much more difficult than we really should.
Am I understanding you correctly when you say that the others did not include a second sample?
Correct, they had a chain of custody that the original sample went to the lab, and then they took that same sample and shipped it somewhere else that the parents requested.
So sample number 1 was did they have dip tests, do you remember?
I don't remember.
All right. I mean, if you give me the names of those
So was-
districts, I can definitely
Yeah,
talk to you.
I just
Was
Googled
that
random
sample
drug testing high school in New
divided
Jersey.
Because
I don't know,
that was a big
This,
thing, is that you
yes,
can't.
and this lab cannot split the sample.
so,
This
but
is
that's,
a big
but that's a
thing.
lab, is that a lab thing or a law?
I think that's a
Generally,
lab thing.
you always
Like
do
a
it
tampering
in-
thing.
in
But what I
sports,
don't know is,
all
do they
professional
all
athletes
dip
always
on
test.
site? Or
Because
do they
labs,
collect and then
you
send?
can't contaminate the sample, because no,
Right.
Because you can't.
in a court of law, they'll argue you contaminate the sample with 2 separate samples.
And the piece that I don't know, Jan, is, we test on site,
Mhm.
and I don't know whether other schools collect and then send and say, we'll get back to you, go back to class. And if the board feels, that one is more beneficial or less. But if you give me some of those
Yeah,
school
I'll
districts,
send
I
it
can
to you.
definitely, yeah.
So, and just for clarity, so we test on site, when did the parents notify?
The parents are notified, and I believe it's only on the positives, is it, or on the negatives too?
No, Dr. Nagel reaches out to all families within a very short
When
amount of time.
they're completing.
Saying, your child was tested, everything was fine, or,
So
Right.
the parents are reached out to this, on
To
the,
say
on
when
the
the
dip
co-
test,
when
on
the-
the dip test, not on,
Yes,
not on the confirming
yes,
test.
correct.
So that even makes it that much more difficult for them to appeal in a 4-hour window.
All they have to do is say they want to appeal.
Right, they can
Right.
And
say,
then they
What
have,
happens if they're at work?
they can say it on that phone call.
You know, suppose you don't reach them. Or suppose they
He's
say,
not leaving a
suppose they
message.
say, I can't actually talk, can't think about this at work.
Then the window
I need to-
wouldn't start until he's,
Well, so they pick up the phone, they say, yes, your son.
I understand you have concerns
And
about the
now-
4 hours.
Yes, exactly, so why are we shortening it to 4 hours? Now
We're
that we
not-
have, now that we have a second sample?
We're not shortening it to
So
4
why are
hours,
we-
it is currently 4 hours.
Why are we keeping it at 4 hours when we have a second sample?
I think that's a conversation for, if this group, if the group feels
Okay.
like that, the appeal language stood at 4 hours, that is not something that was changed in this iteration
Well,
of
it's
that
changed in
appeal
the last
language.
iteration with an agreement that you would consider changing it back.
Richard, just so I'm clear, a test comes up positive, an attempt is made to go to the parent can't be reached. They're overseas in a meeting, can't be reached. Do they?
The clock does not start until they have
That's what I
received
thought.
the
Right.
results of the test.
Right, but if the parent says, that's great, I'm at work, I can't contact the attorney at work, I can't think about this, I have to wait till I get home.
The child can also request the appeal. So if the child says, at that point in time that they've received the results, no, I'm gonna appeal, that
The child
is,
can appeal on their own.
yes.
But the minute it's positive, you're gonna collect a second sample regardless, so then they can appeal whenever you reach them.
Right, but the language in there now is the current language which says the
So
4
you would feel
hours.
comfortable with the 4 hours changing to 24 hours
Correct.
with the modifications on the change of custody, the chain of custody. In other words, the sample will be collected at that same
Right, I
time.
mean, I think that's still.
That's probably a
Right, I think the
more
second,
logical way to do it.
right, I think the second sample's still pretty onerous, but I'm good if we stay to 24 hours. The other alternative I would say is that you can notify the parents at the tip test, but they don't have to tell you about the appeal until the confirming test, until 4 hours after they're notified about the confirming test. Because that way they have some time to think about it. They have some time to reach out to
But
their
we were
attorney.
only doing the confirming test when they were appealing.
Yeah,
Oh, you're only doing it on
Yeah.
appeal?
Yeah.
You do the tip test, and
Okay.
if it comes back positive,
Okay.
what you're suggesting is, look,
Give me
you
some
give
time.
24 hours, just for a whole bunch of, I would agree with you. And I think you just now close the window on that the second sample happens 24 hours later.
That's it.
Location, which is really what you're trying to solve for.
Mhm.
So I think
Absolutely.
moving the
That's
4-hour window
Yeah.
to 24 hours with the sample being collected
Yeah.
at
Having-
the
having
same
time
time.
Yes.
Makes a lot more sense.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine.
So
That's
can
fine.
we make a motion to change that 4 hours to 24 hours?
Yes, you can.
And then keep
The
the
rest of the
confirming
less
language
of
the
that
same?
language.
Okay.
And make this the first reading of that.
Then
modified.
this can be
With
the
the
first
24.
reading. Yeah,
Works fine.
okay, so you want me to make that motion? All right, here we go. I'm gonna make a motion to change the request for an appeal to be made within 4 hours of receiving the results of the drug test to be made within 24 hours of receiving the results of the drug test.
I'll second that.
The other motion, yeah.
What?
As part of that, you could rescind the second part of that policy. In the first reading, where that is, I'm sorry, is it in the policy or the regulation?
It's in the regulation.
It's in the
Right,
regulation.
the regulation.
So the only change is on under the appeal procedure, on line 4, to change the 4 to 24.
Motion is to change the policy, right?
We already have a motion pending.
So the motion, so we already had, I moved it because it was in first reading.
Second
Yes.
reading.
So
right.
now we want to make a motion to change what's in first
To
reading.
amend in the first reading the regulation.
And the regulation to
Right.
say,
Okay.
And then to approve the amended first.
and then approve.
And then approve the amended
Yeah.
regulation in first reading.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so I need a roll call for the change from the 4 hours to the 24 hours, so I'll do that one first. Mr. Baker,
Yes.
Ms. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Mayo,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald.
Yes.
Mrs. Santoro,
Yes.
Mrs. Tover,
Yes.
Ms. Virtue,
Yes.
Ms. Birch,
Yes.
Mrs. Lees.
Yes.
All right, and now we go to the approval of the first reading and the second reading with that change in place. Mr. Baker,
Yes.
Ms. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Mayo,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mrs. Santoro,
Yes.
Mrs. Tover,
Yes.
Ms. Virtue,
Yes.
Ms. Birch,
Yes.
Mrs. Lees.
Yes.
Yes. So when we were cruising along through this, however many pages agenda, and we were in the curriculum section, there it is on the top of page 8. We need to do a public hearing regarding the nursing services plan. So as part of state statute, there are a couple of different things that we have to, that we are required to have a public hearing on, and this nursing services plan is one of them. And when we went through CUSAC last year,
Yes, we did.
the county superintendent pointed out to us, when you go to do the nursing services plan, make sure you do this public hearing. So So, having done that, I need a motion to go into the public hearing first. Someone could do that first and make the motion.
Does this have to be done tonight?
Yes.
Okay, so where in the materials do we have a description of the nursing service?
You have the nursing plan in your package.
Where is that?
It's in that.
Yep.
That's not correct. Ah. Was this in, what was posted online?
Yeah, because I reviewed it online.
This is something we do annually, you've always approved it. What we learned from Roger Jinks during CUSAC was that just procedurally, we were not approving this properly by not going into a public hearing for the discussion and approval of. And there were other things too, Heather, right, that we had
Yes.
been.
They're escaping me right now, but I have them written down, I have a list, so as they come up, as we go through this year, you're gonna see a couple of times, we're gonna say, okay, we gotta do a public hearing on this. Do you wanna make the motion to go in? Sure. Okay, Jamie, and then can I get a second?
Second.
Bob. All right, so now we have time for discussion.
I had a question, but I don't think it's, because I was looking at the IHCPs.
Where are you, Monica?
I'm trying to find it. I was looking at the IHCPs. and
IDHPs?
The IHC, yeah.
IDHPs, page 9?
It's a CP.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah. Care plan.
Chronic care management, what is that?
I don't know.
Emergency health plans?
Yeah, it's number, I guess it's number 8. I thought, because we have Teresa Vaught as the contact person, but isn't it really the nurse? Oh, I guess for the plan. She's the
Yes.
contact person for the
She
plan.
supervises
But
the
the nurses are the ones who are in charge
Yes,
of like
absolutely.
the
Absolutely.
the IHCP or the
CHCP,
ICHCP, one of those guys,
Yes.
start with I.
So you'll see on the first page, she's the district contact, all the school nurses are there. She gathers the information from them, and she's the one who collects it and, is the.
But she's only the contact for this,
For
not
this
for.
document,
for this
absolutely,
document, not for the
absolutely
other
right.
stuff.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, yes, yes.
okay.
Any further discussion? If not, then we have time for public comments. Anyone from the public?
Comments on the
On the
nursing plan?
Oh, we have to make it up. Oh, motion to close.
That's excellent. If we don't have any public comments. Okay, seeing none, I need a motion to close the public hearing.
A motion to close the public hearing on the nursing plan.
I'll second that.
And then we already adopted it as part of the motions 1 through whatever it was, so. All right,
Does it happen with all the plans or just nursing?
there are some other
Like the
things that we have a
technical plan?
public hearing on, and there's not a technical plan. There are some other things, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the list off the top of my head right now.
This is the only one tonight.
This is the only one tonight.
Okay, so we voted on,
Yes,
okay.
yeah.
So community relations did not meet, which leads us to supplementary matters.
Yes. I want to actually make a motion. I want a motion that the Somerset Hills Board of Education go into executive session at 6:30 at the next regular scheduled meeting on September
25th.
25th, 2019.
Okay. Second.
Second.
Okay.
You're gonna have to give wanna just write it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Any other
Supplementary matters otherwise?
Everybody has a vote on it.
Okay.
Supplementary matters.
Okay, we have to vote on this.
We have to vote on it.
Now we have to, she made the motion, we got the
Yeah.
second,
vote.
now I gotta vote, yes, now we need to vote.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Baker,
Yes.
Ms. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Nail,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald.
Yes.
Mrs. Santoro.
Yes.
Mrs. Tober.
Yes.
Ms. Virtue,
Yes.
Ms. Birch,
Yes.
Mrs. Lees.
Yeah. Okay. Any other supplementary matters?
Well, I just want to make one comment, in that we're entering year 2, under our new superintendent. And it's great to see the improvements that have been made over the first year and your sort of team coming together across the administration. There's been a change in tenor, I think, with respect to how the school is being administered and how the board is operating. I think it's a testament to our president, but I think it's also a testament to our superintendent. And I just think it's really exciting to see where we're going as a district, and the improvements are tangible. The new staff additions are amazing. Just as a single board member, I just want you to know that I think you've done a wonderful job in your first year, and I'm very excited and super supportive of your efforts here going forward into the new school year.
Thank you, that means a lot to me. I will keep doing everything I can. This is an important job to me, and I think to all of us.
Yep. Can't agree more.
Thank you too.
Public questions and comments on non-agenda items. This is the smallest
Say it.
crowd. I don't know, 7 months.
It's gone.
Right? 9 months.
I know, I was gonna say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I will move for adjournment.
Okay.
Second.
9:23.
All right.